We've been doing this series, and we're going to do tonight and next week. We'll wrap up this series, just trying to give people who are coming into recovery an accurate picture of what they can expect if they're going to do well in recovery. So what is it that they need to do? And this series right now is, what kind of attitudes do you have to have if you really want to make it in recovery? And so tonight I want to talk about one of the toughest attitudes for people from complex trauma, and that is trust. And the reason it's such a big issue is people from complex trauma have survived by not trusting, only trusting themselves, not anybody else. And now they come into recovery and they begin to figure out that they can't do it alone. They need to trust somebody. And so that is crisis number one. Who do I trust? And I'm not sure I want to trust, but I can't survive unless I do trust. And it's a huge dilemma for people in recovery. But then, as they get going in recovery, they realize, if I really want a healthy, intimate relationship, you can't have that unless you trust. But when they look at their own life and they've been cheated on and lied to, and they've just learned, try to have a relationship without trust, but that really hasn't worked. And so now it's like, if I want an intimate relationship, I'm going to have to figure out how to trust, but I got to find somebody trustworthy, and then I got to be trustworthy. And so that's another dilemma. And then they come into recovery after spending the last number of years lying and being dishonest and a secret life and all kinds of stuff. And you come into recovery now and you say to your family and your partner, you can trust me now, I'm serious this time. And they go, we're not trusting you. And so you still get home from a night out and they check your eyes to make sure you're not high, and that makes you angry. But you've destroyed trust. And so now getting people to trust you is very difficult. And then a fourth thing is, there was a time where you could only trust yourself. But what happened in addiction is that you destroyed yourself. And so now you come into recovery and you go, I don't even trust myself. So how do I rebuild trust with myself? So those are the kind of the four dilemmas around trust that people have. And then people tend to go in two directions when they try to solve this. So the first one is, I'm still not going to trust anybody. I don't care if I think I need anybody. I'm going to become self-sufficient and only trust myself. Or the other, they go, I trust you. I don't even know you, but I'm going to trust you all at once. And then they get hurt again. And so they've never learned healthy trust building, the healthy process of coming to trust a person. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight. But to really understand this dilemma, I got to take you back into, why is trust so difficult for people coming out of complex trauma? And there's a whole bunch of reasons, and I suspect that for most of you, you'll relate to these reasons, and you can check off the ones that are true of you. But what is complex trauma? It is a little child saying, I trust mom and dad and other authorities in my life to protect me and to meet my needs. In complex trauma, you aren't protected and your needs aren't met. And so you go in the child's brain at a subconscious level, the very people that are supposed to protect me and aren't meeting my needs aren't. So I guess I can't trust anybody to protect me or meet my needs. I can only trust myself. And so we told the story of the child that is on the roof and dad says, jump off, I'll catch you. And they jump off and dad doesn't catch them. And dad says, get back up on the roof, I'll catch you this time. And he still doesn't catch them. And after a while, the child says, I'm never going to trust again. Because in their mind, to trust means hurt. If you trust, you get hurt. So don't trust. And so that creates, after being hurt so much, this tremendous fear of getting hurt again and trying to figure out, how do I prevent getting hurt again? And the solution, don't trust. And then it goes beyond that. If you've got shame issues, and everybody in complex trauma does, and that simply means I don't deep down feel that I'm very valuable or lovable. So I'm pretty sure that once a person gets to know me, they're going to do like my mom and dad did. They're going to neglect me, abandon me, abuse me, because they're going to find out what a loser I really am. So if you go into a relationship with a lot of shame issues, then you are convinced in your mind that this person that says they love you only says that because they don't know you yet. And once they get to know you, they're going to go find somebody else, or they're going to cheat on you. And so now that creates a trust dilemma in a relationship, because you're pretty sure they're going to leave you, so you're super jealous, and that messes up a relationship. So shame issues play big time into the ability to trust the other person in the relationship. And then, if the other person has attachment issues, and everybody from complex trauma does, and what that means is you wanted to connect with mom and dad, but you weren't able to because they weren't available, emotionally or physically. And so you never felt that healthy attachment, connection, bond, and you're attracted to another person who isn't emotionally available. That's how it works. And so what happens when you get in a relationship? It is intense. It is a high. It is wonderful. But then after the relationship goes on a while, it goes into kind of this normal place, and to a person that has never connected in a healthy way, they go, I'm bored. I need some excitement. And so this person I'm with, not only is the relationship boring, they're boring. I need to find somebody more exciting. And so that destroys the ability to trust, because you are pretty sure they're going to get bored with you eventually, and then they're going to go looking for somebody more exciting. And that causes huge trust issues. Then many of you have been cheated on in the past in relationships, or you've cheated on your partner. And with that as your history, you now come into a relationship fearing or expecting that they're going to cheat on you, or that you might cheat on them. And that makes trust very difficult. And then you look at all your history of relationships, all your past relationships, and it's basically been this: everybody I've trusted has let me down. Everybody I've trusted has hurt me. So, therefore, this present relationship, even if it's with the most wonderful, reliable, trustworthy person in the world, you say, my past says this, so it must be true now. And therefore, I will not trust this person in my life. Now, there's another thing that messes with trust. Let's say you hook up with somebody that has never dealt with their resentments. And they, in just a short period of time, develop a resentment towards you because you're not perfect. And you hurt them at some time. And they're got a resentment now. And guess what happens when you get a resentment? I got to punish you. I got to make you hurt. I got to pay you back for how you hurt me. And so people who have resentments in a relationship usually end up cheating or trying to hurt the other person, and that messes up trust. So you can see there's one thing after another that attacks a person's ability to trust that comes out of complex trauma. And then if you had a parent who was promiscuous, you grew up with that as your role model. You grew up with that as how you were taught how to deal with problems and cope with relationship stuff. And so that, whether you realize it or not, has imprinted on your brain. And it is there as a tool that you have picked up by watching a parent. And then some. All complex trauma results in fear being the main emotion, but some feed the fear and feed the fear until the fear turns into paranoia. And now they're suspicious of everybody all the time. And so that just wipes out any hope of ever being able to trust, because you're constantly paranoid that they're doing something behind your back. And many of you have been there. There's a weird one that happens within complex trauma. So let's say you had an uncle that slept around with every woman he could find. And then you meet a guy that reminds you of your uncle. Guess what happens? You're pretty sure this new guy, because he reminds you of your uncle, is your uncle. And so you don't trust because he reminds you of your uncle. That's called transference. That happens within complex trauma. Now, outside of complex trauma, what erodes trust even more is our culture today and the media. Kim and I like to watch some of the series that are on Netflix, etc. And what you find in pretty much every series is what is presented as the norm. People sleep around. That's just presented. That's what our culture does and even applauds and puts in the media. And so that is kind of the backdrop for everybody living within this culture. And then the final thing that messes up the ability to trust is this. What is the criteria that you use to choose a mate or a partner? If your criteria is the wrapping paper on the gift, and you say, wow, this is a beautiful wrapping paper, I really like the bow, this is the greatest gift I ever had, and then you open the present and it's a rotten banana, you got the wrong criteria. But what happens in our culture today, people choose a partner based on the packaging. And they don't look at what's inside the packaging, and then they get in there and the relationship and they find out it's a rotten banana and they can't trust that. So if you have the wrong criteria, which is our culture spreads, then you're going to have trouble trusting, because the criteria doesn't tell you whether a person is trustworthy. It just tells you if the wrapping paper's nice. So those all fight against trust. Now, does that make sense as to why trust is such a difficult thing? Now, the next question is, okay, where from here? How do I rebuild that? So I want to give you a couple things just to get you thinking about that, okay? Number one, let's say you don't trust and you get in a relationship and all of a sudden you're feeling insecure and jealous. Instead of you saying, I might have trust issues, it's not them, it's me, you go, you're not trustworthy. I bet you're cheating on me. You blame them, you accuse them. Instead of owning and looking at your trust issues, you try to make your feelings their fault. And that is a common thing. And so what I want you to understand in this talk tonight is you got to look at where you're broken inside when it comes to trust. That's what needs to heal. You can try to find the perfect partner, but if you don't deal with your trust issues, you're still going to be blaming a perfect person for the way you're feeling. And so you got to focus on your stuff. So one way to look at recovery is learning to trust again. And that means learning to trust gradually in a healthy development of trust. And that is very difficult. Take that a little bit further. That is learning who I can trust and what programs I can trust. Because if I don't have the right people and the right programs, I could be trusting, but I'm trusting the wrong thing. And that could get me into trouble. So I need to figure out who I can trust and what I can trust as far as programs. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to look at rebuilding trust from two angles. So first of all, who can I trust? So in the illustration I just gave you, you don't determine a person's whether they're trustworthy based on the wrapping paper. It's what's inside, or it's character. Character determines whether a person is trustworthy. And what I mean by character is this. Is this a person that is honest? And what helps me know that? Do they lie? Are they hypocritical? Do they walk a different thing than what they talk? Do they have a secret life? Are they deceptive? Do they wear a lot of masks? Those point to this person isn't totally honest. Are they dependable? If they say they're going to do something, do they do it? Are they able to restrain themselves with some of their powerful desires? Or do they have good internal boundaries? So let me put it this way. Everybody lives with a desire to eat. Everybody has a sex drive. The question is, are they able to control that? Or will they pursue their sex drive in a way that might hurt other people? Because if they don't control their sex drive, then they're going to use and abuse other people. So I want to find a person that takes their most powerful drives and keeps them under control. Because then they're a safe person. Then I can trust them. If they can manage their most powerful drives, then they can manage everything else in their life. What about their greed for money? What about their desire for power or recognition or position? Are they able to control those drives and keep them healthy? Because if they go outside of healthy, then they're going to start to hurt those around them. So that's what you're looking for. So check a person out. Not just out on a date where you all say the right things and it's a fake environment. Watch them in all kinds of different settings. See what they're like with other people. Get to know, does this person have healthy character? Because if they don't, they're not going to be trustworthy. Now, here's what happens for a lot of people. You get in a relationship and you haven't really checked them out. You just checked out the wrapping paper and like that. You find out you got a rotten banana. And then you say, instead of dumping this person, I'm going to try to change them. I will now control their every move, their every action. I'm going to make them trustworthy. Do you want to know what usually happens with that? It backfires. Because they say, you're trying to be my mother. Who do you think you are trying to control me? And they rebel more and more, or they get more and more secretive. So check it out up front. Trying to fix it and control them later does not work. Okay, so that takes us to the next piece. Let's say you find somebody that is trustworthy. You've checked out their character over quite a lengthy period of time. And you say, I think I can trust them. So let me just give you an illustration. Let's say you're back up on the roof and we got Jesus on the ground and he says, jump. Now you checked him out and he's trustworthy, but you're full of fear. Because every time in the past that you jumped, you got dropped. So what happens next is once you find a person is trustworthy, you take the risk of trusting them. You choose to trust them even though you don't feel like you can. You base it on what you've thought and checked out your thinking brain, not on your feeling brain. And that is important. Now let me just qualify that. I don't think it'd be wise to jump off the roof on the first day, but it might be good to trust them for something quite small. And if they prove to be trustworthy, then you trust them for something a little bit bigger. And if they're trustworthy, you trust them for a bit more and a bit more. So that is how trust grows. Now, when I ask my wife Kim to marry me, I checked her out. Not just looks, but character. And I said, this is a trustworthy girl. Now, we got married, and I knew her, but I didn't know her. I knew her academically from watching her, but I didn't know her from close experience of living together. So I still would get a little bit insecure at times if she was talking to other people, guys, and I go, oh. But then I trusted her and she proved faithful. I trusted her and she proved faithful. We're coming up on 34 years in a couple months. And you want to know, in the early days, trust was a choice that didn't have a lot of confidence. Today, trust is a confidence. Why? Because it's been proven over and over again. So in the early days right now, you're choosing to trust, but you don't have confidence yet. That takes a lot of time to build. But you make the risk and make the choice. This person's proved trustworthy. I'll trust them for a little, and then it grows. Now that leads to the second part I want to look at. How do I get others to trust me again? So back to recovery. You lied your face off. Now you're in recovery and you say, I'm serious this time. I mean it. Now the problem is if you've been a relapser over the years, they've heard that before. And you can say, but I'm really serious this time. Still doesn't make any difference. And so then you can get frustrated. So if you haven't been trustworthy in the past, they have no proof that you've changed. Your words don't mean anything to them. They're not going to trust you again till you prove it for a while. Now, a good addict, they're trustworthy for a week and they say, okay, you should trust me now. I've been good for a week. And people, family and loved ones go, no, maybe after 6 months or a year, we'll start to trust you. But you got to prove yourself long term. And we don't like that. Because we don't like people doubting us and questioning us and being suspicious of us. It doesn't feel good. So what is it that I have to do to rebuild trust? So here's what I would tell a client at React as they come to the end. So let's just say it's their parents, they're living at home, or it's a partner. I would say, I want you to sit down with them and I want you to tell them your recovery plan. And I want you to say, here are the meetings I'm committing myself to go to from now on. And you're making yourself accountable. You're writing it out for them to see. Here's my sponsor. Here's what I'm going to do in my recovery as far as church, steps, meetings. You lay all of that out. Then you go, here's what I'm going to do for ongoing counseling. Here's what I'm going to do as far as getting involved and starting to volunteer. So they have a clear, upfront picture of your recovery plan. So you're being totally open with them. And then I say, I want you to go further. I want you to tell them what you're committing yourself to do around the house. So that you're not a freeloader that's just doing recovery full time. You're becoming a responsible adult at home as well. So I want you to commit to the chores you're going to do, the cleaning you're going to do, how you're going to contribute financially, your responsibility with the kids, so that you are totally accountable. Now that makes a lot of you start to squirm because you're really putting yourself out there. And now they can call you on it if you don't. Then I say there's a second thing I want you to do. You've been learning about yourself, about when you're most vulnerable, about the things that trigger you, about scenarios that you can't go into because you're just too weak. tell your family that. Tell them, you know what? I can't handle a credit card or a debit card. It's too much of a temptation. I need you to take those. You know what? I can't see that friend. So if you ever see me around that friend, call me on it. You know what? I can't handle Facebook right now. So I'm going to not go on Facebook, and you can check up on me that I don't do that. And you do that kind of thing. That is so important. And then say, if I start isolating, if I start procrastinating on my responsibilities, that's not a good sign. Call me on it. Now that gets tricky, because then you have to be open to them calling you. So then I would turn to the family with the addict in recovery listening, and I'd say, what have you noticed about this addict in the past about when they're in danger, when they're not in a good headspace? And they might say, you know what? Whenever we see them starting to swear more frequently than normal, we know they're not in a good place. Or maybe they quit smoking. If they start smoking again, that's a warning sign to us. Or if they start hanging around with certain people, or if they start watching porn again, all of those things are warning signs. You want to know who knows your warning signs the best? Your kids. They can tell better than anybody when you're not in a good place. And one of the big ones is when you start going to distractions. Video games, watching TV all the time, sleeping all the time. Warning signs. So you need to be able to hear that from your family, your loved ones, without getting defensive. And then the next part is this. What are you going to do if you're struggling? I say to the addict, let's say you're struggling all of a sudden. You're craving. You're feeling the obsession coming back. Now, many of them say, if I went and told my family would freak out. And they'd be all over me, and they'd be shaming me, and they'd be hovering over me. So I don't feel I can tell my family if I'm struggling. So I say, okay, let's figure out how we're going to do this. Because if you are struggling and you keep it inside because you don't think you can share it, usually it's going to be too late before you finally share it. So you need to work out with your loved ones. If I am struggling, I need to be able to tell you I'm struggling without you getting paranoid. And I need to be able to tell you I'm struggling without you hovering and trying to control everything. And then I say, okay, what happens if your family picks up on warning signs you're not even aware of? And they come and say, we think you're struggling. Are you going to flip out on them and get all defensive? You got to be able to do that. In other words, you need a game plan, a way to communicate, a way to be accountable, a way to share that is safe. Then next I say, okay, I don't want you communicating just when you're struggling. Might it be good, have a date night once a week? And the purpose of the date night is this. It's a way to touch base and say, how are you doing? How's your week been? Any areas where you've been struggling a little bit? So you invite not just, how are you doing today, generalities, or I'm struggling, crisis. You develop a way of connecting and being accountable and open in a non-crisis situation. So that the communication channels allows you to be open. And what happens for a lot of people is as you're open on a weekly basis, you start to become aware of stuff that you weren't even aware of in yourself. And all of a sudden as you're sharing, you go, wow, I am really stressed out. I hadn't figured that out till I was talking to you. I'm not in a good place. I'm depressed a little bit. And so that is an important piece for them to feel they can trust you and for you to be open and honest with them. And what that therefore means is this. You have to be committed to be an open book. You're not just sharing about the odd little thing, you're being transparent. Now I got to stop and say this. Don't have this kind of arrangement with somebody who's not safe. This will only work if the people you enter into this arrangement with are trustworthy and safe. Because if you share all of this information with somebody that's not safe, guess what's going to happen? They're going to use it against you. And they're going to beat you up and throw it in your face. So, find the right people to have this kind of accountability relationship with. Now, here's what I want you to get. If you violated trust and broken trust, you got to share more information for a while than is normal, than even you would want to do in order to rebuild trust. So if you're going out, you say, I'm going to Walmart, then I'm going here. You give full disclosure of all of your plans. And you should be able to say, I'm going to go out for a while to do a couple errands. In your mind, that should be good enough. But no, you've broken trust. So now you got to over-communicate information so that they're not wondering, I wonder if they told me everything. I wonder if they're hiding any details. All of that is very necessary. So, I hope you see, trust is vital if you're going to grow, if you're going to have healthy, intimate relationships, if you're going to have good relationships with your kids. Trust is vital, but it is hard. It is super hard to rebuild trust and to know who to trust. And so I hope that this gives you some practical tools that you can use to begin to do good healing and growth in this area of trust. So with the second half, I'm always wanting to find a Bible story that helps us connect to the first half, so the trust. So I thought I'd share with you a bit of the story of Joshua. And if you're not familiar with Joshua, probably one of the greatest leaders in Israel was Moses that we've talked about, and he brought this nation who were slaves in Egypt, and he delivered them and brought them out of Egypt. And God's promise was to take them to their own land and give them their own land, and Moses led them there. And then they chickened out, and so they walked around in the desert for 40 years. So that was Moses. Joshua took over after Moses died. And Joshua led them into that promised land. Joshua had been Moses' personal servant, attendant, aide for those 40 years of wandering around the desert. So he was probably closer to Moses than anybody else and had served him under him all of those very many years. But where I want to pick up the story tonight is, how would you feel Moses has died, God sends you an email and says, I'm choosing you to lead these people who've been wandering around for 40 years, stubborn, complaining, miserable. Your job, lead them into the land. God said, I'll be with you, and I would go, and I think this is what happened with Joshua. He says, I don't know if I can trust you. And Joshua was scared to death. He was full of fear, and that's where the book of Joshua begins. So Joshua gets his job assignment, and it quickly becomes evident that he's having a huge problem trusting that God's going to give him the help that he needs. So let me just make a connection with you. Whenever you look at fear and anxiety, it's always related to not being able to trust resources or not having resources. So a person in fear or anxiety either doesn't have the resources to handle the situation, or they don't trust anybody to help them with the situation. So Joshua has a great big job assignment. He's got resources. He just doesn't know that he can trust them. And so he is full of anxiety and fear. So let me read the section to you as the book begins. It says, after the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, Moses' assistant. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I am giving them. I promise you what I promised Moses, that wherever you set your foot, you will be on land I have given you. So wherever you walk, that's going to be your land. Wherever you walk, that's what I'll give you. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. For I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. Then he says this, be strong and very courageous. What's it say? What's it assuming? He's not feeling strong and he sure isn't feeling courageous. Now watch this, that's going to be repeated. Then he says, be careful to obey all the instruction Moses gave you. Then you'll be successful in everything you do. Study this book. And that's the books that had been written by Moses, 5 books. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now I want to get you to think of why Joshua is scared to death. So put yourself in his shoes, okay? So for the last 40 years, Joshua has had a front row seat watching Israel. He's been with Moses every day. And what has happened every day, he has listened to people complain and grumble and rebel. And what did they complain the most about? Who the leader was. And they thought they should get a different leader, or they thought the leader was trying to kill them. All of that. And those are the people he's supposed to lead now. Man, if you spent 40 years studying a jerk, and you are totally convinced they're the worst jerk you'd ever met in the world, and now you're asked to take that jerk and help them, you're going, not a chance. I know what this is like. I know what these people are like. And so to Joshua, just being told you're leading the very people Moses tried to lead for 40 years, and they wouldn't cooperate with him, now I want you to do it. See how overwhelming that would have felt. Like you would not have been able to sleep that night. Next thing, it would have been great if God said, Moses is getting old, so I'm going to make you the leader, but you're still going to have Moses as your confidant and your advisor and your consultant. But Moses is dead. Who's he supposed to talk to now when he's having a bad day? Who's he supposed to talk to now when he's got a question and isn't sure what to do? So his main resource, his rock, is gone. That would have been scary. Next, for the last 40 years, what has been Joshua's title? Well, Moses, he's our leader. Joshua, he's a servant. He's the secretary. He's the helper. And now God is saying the secretary's become the boss. Well, they still see him as a secretary. They don't see him as Moses. They see him as less than Moses. So there's a perception by the people of Joshua that sees him very differently than how they saw Moses. So my point is, they did not naturally respect Joshua. They respected Moses, but they didn't have as much respect for Joshua. And Joshua knew that if they were going to follow his leadership, they were going to have to learn to respect him, but they didn't. So that was scary. Now the next thing is this. 38 years earlier, so Moses brought them out of slavery. It took them, it would only take a couple weeks to get to the promised land. But what God says, I'm going to make it last 2 years. Because I want the people to get used to being free. I want them to set up government and all of that. Before they get to the promised land, I want to get a certain number of ducks all sorted out and in a row. So they did that. 38 years earlier, they arrived at the edge of the promised land, and Moses sent in 12 spies to check it out. And they all came back and said, this is the most prosperous land we have ever seen. The crops are amazing. It is gorgeous, beautiful land. 10 of the 12 spies said, we can't conquer. Their armies are greater than ours. Let's not go in. Joshua was one of those 12 spies that went 38 years ago into that promised land and brought back a report. He was one of the 2 spies that said, we can go in because God promised us. Do you want to know what the other 10 did? They said, don't listen to these 2, they're crazy. And all the people said, we should stone those 2 spies because they're giving us bad intel. They're not reliable. How would you like that as a resentment to simmer away for 38 years? These people have messed up and they see me as the crazy one. Now, all of that generation in those 38 years died off. But guess what Joshua is leading now is not the old people, it's all their kids. And all of those kids, guess what kind of homes they grew up in? Negative, abusive, critical, no trust, miserable. And God is saying, welcome to the next generation, that's your job. And that, I don't think Joshua was too excited about. And then, there's one other piece. There were in that promised land all kinds of nations that had powerful armies. And so for them to go in and settle that land, they had to conquer those armies. The people of Israel have been wandering around in a desert. They don't have much fighting experience. They might be able to use a cattle prod or something, but they're not experienced with bows and arrows or spears. They've been slaves building pyramids and wandering in a desert taking care of sheep. And now they're supposed to go in and become an army. And Joshua is going, oh my goodness. There's going to be a whole bunch of farmers with pitchforks fighting much more capable armies. Now, with all that in your mind, let me say again, God shows up with an email and says, I want you to lead these 3 million people into a promised land. Think you'd be shaking in your boots. That's what Joshua is doing. So here's what God did to help him. And this is the part I want you to get. What I want you to see is this. God, did you notice, did not shame or criticize or condemn Joshua that he was struggling to trust. Do you want to know what I think a lot of people do when they start trusting God? Is they have a moment where they don't trust God and fear takes over, and then they beat themselves up. And they think, God's probably really mad at me. God's probably disappointed in me. I'm such a loser. I can't get this. God didn't do that with Joshua. And what I want you to hear is that when we struggle to trust, God gets it. And his response to Joshua was not condemnation, it was encouragement. It was to help him grow in trust, the very thing he needed. He didn't need shaming. He needed understanding and encouragement. So if you struggle to trust, that's okay. God gets it. He's not judging you for that. Next thing I want you to see, in verse 8, he said, Joshua, on 2 occasions, I want you to prosper and succeed. Now that doesn't mean, Joshua, I want you to become a billionaire. It means I want you to fulfill the job I've given you. How do you determine success in your life? How can you get to the end of your life and be able to say, I've succeeded? What criteria will you use to say I succeeded? Will it be that you got a lot of money in your bank? Will it be that you drive a nice car or have a nice house? You know what the true measure of success is? I fulfilled the purpose God made me for. If I can fulfill the purpose I was made for, I have succeeded. And I have prospered. And so God says, that's my commitment too. I want to see you fulfill the purpose I made you for. I'm on your team here. You're not doing this alone on a solo mission. We're working together. And I am committed even more than you are to seeing you succeed. In Jeremiah 29, God said to this nation of Israel, my plans for you are to prosper you and to give you success. That is my desire for everybody. Then he starts to encourage him. 3 times he says, don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. He knows he's struggling, and so he assures him and reassures him and reassures him. It's okay, I got this. And then he renews the promises. 5 times he says, I will do what I promised to do. What I promised Moses, I'm still going to stick to that promise. Faith is not built on my faith. So let me give you this. A lot of Christians think I just need more faith. But what they're really saying is I need faith in my faith. So if I have more faith, then I get what I want. But you know what? You could have a chair here that's got 3 legs, and you could have all the faith in the world that you could sit on it and not fall over, but you're still going to fall over. The issue is not faith in your faith. The issue is the object of your faith. Is it trustworthy? And so what God is saying is, Joshua, don't get all wrapped up in, do I have enough faith? Get wrapped up in, if I'm trustworthy. Check me out. Go back to my promises. Remind yourself of my promises. And as you do that, then you put your faith in a reliable object of your faith. And that is where we need to have our attention directed. And then he assures him, several occasions, I will be with you. I will abandon you. I remember as a dad with very young children, every time they went to a new situation, they got nervous and fearful. What did they need? Did they need me to just give them a pep talk? Do you know what? On many occasions it was, let me go with you the first time. And they would hold my hand and walk with me into this new situation unafraid. Why? Because my dad's here. And that's what God is saying to Joshua. Joshua, I'm not sending you to kindergarten all by yourself. I'm going with you and I'll hold your hand and I won't abandon you. You got a rock. You got somebody you can rely on. Then I think Joshua began to figure something out. How would God best prepare Joshua to lead this nation of Israel? Would he send him to a university in Toronto and say, get lots of academic understanding of leadership? No, he'd say, you know what? I'm going to let him be mentored by a man who is the greatest leader in the world, who is leading the most difficult people in the world, and I'm going to let him be his servant for 40 years, and by osmosis, he's going to learn how to lead by taking care of a leader. And you know what happens with a lot of people in early recovery? They go, I want to be a leader. I think I'm called to be a leader. I don't want to do this making coffee stuff and stacking chairs stuff. I'm better than that. You know what? If Joshua said that for 40 years, he would have never been a leader because he wouldn't have gone through the training. The training is never a lot of fun. It's the menial jobs that nobody wants to do sometimes. But as you do them, you're mentored and you learn. And Joshua said, I didn't go to a man's university. I went to God's university for 40 years. I was doing a job that I thought was boring and was a no-end job. Guess what? I got trained by the greatest leader with the most difficult people. Wow, I got the best training in the world. So look at your current experience, your current circumstances. Instead of being negative about some of the stuff you have to do, think of Joshua and say, maybe God's training me through this for something else. If I'm faithful in the little thing, He'll prepare me for a bigger thing. But if I'm not faithful in the little, I'll never be ready for the bigger. So that is so important. Then he says, meditate. A lot of days I wish God would lead, react, and finding freedom by sending me a morning email saying, do this, take care of this, be aware of this, all of that. But God is frustrating sometimes. He does not cooperate with how I think He should operate sometimes. But you know what I've learned? God says, get to know me. I've given you a guide, my Bible. I've written down what healthy is. I've written down what I'm like. I've written down hundreds of stories that show you how I work. Know it. And as you know it and meditate on it, and it becomes part of you, when I face decisions, I go, oh yeah, that's the right decision. God didn't send me an email. He just sent me a long letter that I've spent years studying and getting to know. And so if I want to be successful and fulfill my purpose, I got to know the user's manual. I got to know the guide so that I know what healthy is. I know the person that wrote the guide. Then I get the best insight and the best principles to run an organization from. In other words, you have to stay connected spiritually. And God is saying to Joshua, yeah, you got a user's manual, you got a master, but you got to read that user manual as well to stay close to me and stay connected to me. And I think that's what he also learned from Moses. In living with Moses, he realized that whenever Moses had an issue, he went to God about it and prayed. And he saw a man who was so great in people's eyes, humbly depending on God and relying on God day after day. And he learned great leaders lead from their knees. And that became part of the spiritual connection for him. And then there's two other things I want to quickly give you. So Joshua begins to lead, okay? So the first place they have to go to is the city of Jericho. And if you've ever heard the Bible story, it was a walled city, and God told Joshua, march around the city, and they marched around 7 days. And on the seventh day, they marched around 7 times, and the walls fell over, okay? So that was assignment number 1 in leadership. Now you got to get this. Before 2 things happened before they went to Jericho. A week or a few days before going to Jericho, God said this. All these kids running around the desert that are now grown up that you're leading, their parents were so stubborn, they never circumcised their boys like I told them to do, to make them good Jews. Circumcise them all now. Now, can you imagine a soldier who was circumcised 2 days ago going into battle? Hobbling along in pain. Got a great big jock so nobody will hurt them. And you go, why in the world would God say circumcise them right before battle? That was a recipe for failure. Two things. Number one, sometimes we got to be forced to trust. Sometimes we got to be brought to a place of weakness, otherwise we won't trust. Sometimes God kicks out some of the things that we rely on for strength to bring us to a place where we say, God, if you don't help me, I am in big trouble. And that drives us to faith and trust. So trust doesn't usually grow in a classroom. It grows when you're put in a crisis and you're forced to trust. And we don't like learning that way, but that's the way it goes. Secondly, God says, if you're going to maintain a spiritual connection, you got to start obeying. And this is an area you never obeyed me in before. Let's get that straightened out. Let's get sorted out so that there's nothing between us that is hindering the relationship. And then the last thing that he does, Joshua, he goes for a walk one night around Jericho all by himself. He just wants to check it out, get the lay of the land, check out the walls. And all of a sudden there's an angel, a bright shining creature in front of him with a big sword. And Joshua says, whose side are you on? And the angel says, I am the commander of God's army. So Joshua was ready to fight this guy. He thought he was an enemy. And he says, no, I am the leader of God's army. Now, what was he saying? Joshua, you're the leader of this human army, but I'm your boss. So the only way you're going to be successful as a leader is if you're a follower. So you're leading people, but you're following me. So your only way to have success is surrender to me. But then he's also saying, by that angel showing up, is Joshua, you got a human army, but there's an invisible army too. We're fighting with you. You're not alone. There's a whole other army that is going to be working with you. In all of those things, Joshua learned to trust. And that's what God does with us. Learn, meditate, get driven to weakness sometimes. Surrender, get your life straightened out with God. And all of those things, trust begins to build. Okay, let's pray.